Hello, I'm Robert Bateman, and this is Privacy Corner, where I talk you through the 3 most interesting privacy stories of the week. Thanks, as always, to Privado.ai for providing this space for me to ramble about privacy every week. Now, today I'll be talking you through what exactly happened with Zoom's terms of service and artificial intelligence, a very comprehensive data protection bill that just passed in India, and 2 very significant data breaches that occurred in the UK this week. So first up, let's talk about Zoom. Now, you've probably heard about this. Somebody discovered, or somebody looked very closely at an update to Zoom's terms of service that actually occurred in March, and realized that Zoom gives itself permission to do a lot of things with your data. So the 2 sections I think are most interesting here are 10.2 and 10.4, and they pertain to 2 different types of data. What Zoom calls service-generated data, so think of that as device data, including telemetry data, which is notoriously broad, product usage data, diagnostic data, and similar content, and customer content. So that's basically anything other than service-generated data, unless it's been labeled confidential by the user. So what can Zoom do under its terms? Well, you purportedly agree when you sign up to use Zoom that the company can do basically whatever it wants with service-generated data. So use, collection, access, creation, modification, distribution, processing, sharing, maintenance, and storage, including for the purposes of training and tuning of algorithms and models. And what about customer content? Well, the license is not that different for this type of data. That could be screen recordings, video calls, audio calls, private chats. You agree and grant and hereby grant Zoom a perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, sub-licensable and transferable license to do basically anything with your call recordings, including machine learning, artificial intelligence training and testing. So when this hit the headlines, Zoom did a bit of a backtrack and said, look, we didn't mean to write these terms quite so broadly. We don't use customer content for AI training purposes without consent. We have a couple of AI products that you can opt into, but service-generated data, they didn't really comment on. They deem themselves to own that data, and they can do, according to Zoom, whatever they want with it. So they updated their terms, adding this single line: notwithstanding the above, Zoom will not use audio, video, or chat customer content to train our artificial intelligence models without your consent. Now, there are still some issues here, I think. Service-generated data might sound quite benign, but it's covered by the e-privacy directive in the EU and the EEA in the UK, and you need consent to use that sort of data for any non-essential purposes. Consent is, of course, set by the GDPR and does not include clicking I accept to a very long terms of service agreement. Now, as for customer content, that obviously is more sensitive, and I will take Zoom's word for it that they don't use that without consent. But there is still concern here under HIPAA and the health breach notification rule, which are interpreted to include these types of data as protected health information under certain circumstances. So have a good old think about whether you want Zoom using this sort of data for these purposes, because they still retain the right to do so under their contract. Now, next up, let's talk about India's Digital Personal Data Protection Bill. We've been waiting a long time for this law to pass. It still needs to be signed by the president, but it's cleared the upper house. So first, let's compare it a bit to the GDPR. We have data fiduciaries under this law. That means essentially data controllers. Data principals are essentially data subjects. Data processors and data protection officers have the same meaning as under European law. And we also have some very interesting new concepts. So a consent manager. which is a single point of contact within a data fiduciary that enables the data principal to manage their consent. And we have some controversial clauses in this bill too. For example, the central government can exempt certain types of data fiduciaries, including startups, from the transparency and data principal rights obligations. So this is presumably to allow India's economy to grow, people to innovate and whatnot. Probably they have artificial intelligence processing in mind here. There's also some government carve-outs from certain provisions that have been quite controversial too. Nonetheless, though, it's like 1.4 billion people in India, and they now have a comprehensive data protection law, or they soon will. Now, finally, let's find out what has been going on in the UK. There were two very significant data breaches announced this week. The first was from the Electoral Commission, which oversees elections in the UK, doesn't run them, that's for local councils. But they discovered in October that a bad actor had been in their systems for over a year, since August 2021. And that bad actor had access to their copies of the electoral registers and also got into their emails, so could have a lot more besides that. Now, there are several types of electoral registers. One of them is publicly available, so that has people's names and addresses on it, and these attackers now have the name and address of anyone who registered to vote in the UK between 2014 and 2022. Now, publicly available data sounds like it's not a big deal, but of course the context is important. You can't just roll up to the electoral office or the website and grab all the data you want. It is controlled, and having unfettered access to it is very different from what most people have. The second type of register is for people who have opted out of the public register. So they are more private people who might not want their electoral data to be public, and that has been compromised too. There is a third type of voter, anonymous voters, who for privacy or security reasons vote anonymously. That data is safe. So that's something at least. Now, the second UK data breach I discuss today is from the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and they accidentally revealed pretty much everything about all of their officers and civilian staff. So we've got a data leak here, which identifies each officer's service number, status, gender, contract type, name, and their rank. Now, this is a big deal because it's Northern Ireland. So the Troubles, the sort of ethno-nationalist conflict that, killed hundreds, if not thousands of people, the worst days of that are behind us, but police officers still suffer abuse and attacks. One was killed in February this year even. So this is very sensitive data, and it's freely circulating on WhatsApp groups, according to a source to the Belfast Telegraph. What happened here was that the PSNI, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, responded to an FOI request, and it went up on What Do They Know, which is a public database of freedom of information responses. And the request was quite innocuous. They wanted to know numbers of police officers at different ranks or some such, but there was a second tab on the spreadsheet that revealed all this very sensitive data. Now, just to give you an idea of the context here, this is an anonymous officer speaking to the Belfast Telegraph, who said that as a serving police officer, his own family doesn't know what he does, and he's had to move house and out of the town he lived in, as advised by senior officers for security reasons. I deleted social media accounts. Now my full name and initials are widely available. It's a complete disaster. So the ICO is looking into both of these incidents, both very serious in very different ways. So that's all I've got for this week. Please subscribe to the newsletter. I'm sharing that down below. And there'll be more information and resources on all these stories, plus some recommended reading for the week. Big thank you to Privado AI once again for providing this space for me. And do check out Privado AI. They're doing some really interesting privacy engineering stuff, privacy code scanning. Looks like a great product. So thanks so much for your time. I've been Robert Bateman, and I'll see you next week.